When we are not in a state of self-forgiveness, anything we do, especially consciously, like spirituality, for example, any practice we embark upon, any aim that we have for ourselves, will be coming from a state of compensation, trying to compensate for that maybe unseen area where we believe we're guilty of something. That something may be very, very unspecific. It may be simply for existing, being in the way of other people, not wanting to stand out, not wanting to be yourself, because that would mean that you're only creating more guilt. You're more guilty of standing out. You're more guilty of being yourself. You're more guilty of being present. Many of us try to avoid being present, because when we're present, we feel, when we're present in any sort of way, not necessarily in the way that we did in the meditation, but when we feel present as a person, as a being, we very, very quickly feel guilty of being present. We call it arrogance. We call it ego. Now, true, sometimes it may be that the act of that personality, the act, that personal act, can be very egotistical, shall we say. But that too only comes from trying to compensate for feeling like we're sinners, feeling like we're guilty. So during this meeting, ask yourself, what do I feel guilty of? Again, it can be very, very unspecific. It can be very, very abstract, very, very subtle. What do you, in your heart, feel guilty of? Or in your mind, whatever works for you, or in your gut. What do you feel guilty of? Where do you not forgive yourself? Maybe images come, maybe feelings come, maybe memories come, maybe nothing comes. Maybe a bunch of words you picked up along the way. Whatever it is, just let it be there. But keep with the question, what am I guilty of? Or what do I experience myself as guilty of? What do I believe I am guilty of? What am I running away from? What am I trying to compensate for? What did I do so wrong that I need to compensate for? This entire lifetime of seeking, of trying to achieve, trying so hard to become something I'm not, or maybe that I think I am, just to compensate for my guilt, just to compensate for that little idea that's been infused within our consciousness, that collective idea is a collective idea as well, and we're not separate from the collective. The collective as well as individual idea, I am not worthy. Or as seen from the other side, I am guilty. I'm unforgivable. I am not enough. Where do we harbor those feelings? Where do we still harbor those beliefs, those ideas, even though we know it's not true? Are you still running? Are you still burning yourself out? Are you still tiring yourself out? Now make no mistake, you can tire yourself out with spirituality like you can in no other field. So spirituality is not necessarily the answer. It's not necessarily a sign of your resolution of your sense of guilt or your sense of inadequacy. It may very well be a fancy cover-up. So where are you running? Where are you uncomfortable with yourself as you are? Where do you believe you're not worthy? Etc. Just allow yourself the space for these images and feelings to come up. You don't have to do anything with them. You just have to give them the space. Give them that allowance. See them in the light of the space as we saw it in the meditation when we began. Because all the stuff I talk about, whether it is realizing some deeper aspect of your consciousness, a more changeless, timeless aspect of your consciousness, or whether it is to sort of actualize that into your life in the form of realizing that you are all the time creating your reality. Either one of these aspects of my teaching will not serve you, will not necessarily do you justice as much as it would if you'd forgive yourself first. If done out of a state of not forgiving yourself, what happens when you're not forgiving yourself? When you're in a state of not forgiving yourself, what's actually going on? Are you okay with yourself as you are in that moment? Are you now? Now is the only time there is. Now is the only moment, the only existence that there is. Watch what happens when you don't forgive yourself. The moment you cannot live with yourself, the moment you feel guilty about something, immediately your neurons fire up and you're trying to compensate for it. You're imagining something in the future that will be better. You're imagining what action you should take in order to be forgivable, again, in your own eyes, or in the eyes of others, which are still your own eyes. If we do anything, any practice to achieve or find or discover happiness, joy, lightness, awareness, if we do any of that, and many of you may know that because many of you have been seeking in a very conscious, deliberate way for many, many years, many decades maybe even. So many of you know what happens when you're not forgiving yourself. As long as you don't forgive yourself, you'll be seeking. Now, seeking is natural. Seeking cannot be escaped, but the desperation with which you seek, the joyless ways with which we tend to seek, the self-depriving ways with which we tend to seek, these are all ways to feel more guilty. Because if we feel guilty, we feel like we can be forgiven more. Bear with me with this. This is a subtle thing, but if you get it, imagine you're doing something. Like, I had this conversation with a woman on Facebook today, and she's in a situation where she's deciding to leave her marriage. She has kids. She feels guilty toward the kids for moving. Very practical example. Feeling guilty is a choice. Why would she, in that circumstance, and she is all of us in a different circumstance, why would she choose to feel guilty? She sees it, she knows it, she knows it's not ultimately the way to go, it's not absolutely beneficial, and yet some part of her consciousness perceives benefit in feeling guilty. That's the only reason why she keeps feeling guilty. After you're conscious of it, the only reason why you're still holding on to it is because you perceive some value or benefit in it. We want to feel guilty. If she decides to feel guilty, that will make her more forgivable toward her children. We don't like somebody that does something we don't like that then does not feel guilty. We like those that feel really, really guilty, that apologize 1,200 times every day and send us postcards how much they hurt our lives. So by doing that, they can actually, to some degree, feel like they're exonerating themselves from feeling guilty by feeling guilty. See what I mean? Does everybody see that? We're compensating for it. So we want to feel guilty because we want to be loved. The benefit that that woman, or us all, perceive in feeling guilty and expressing that guilt is to be loved, to be accepted. And through that reflection of others loving us, to get a glimpse of what it is like to simply feel love. Ultimately, what we want is simply to feel love. We just think that it needs to come from the other person. We think it needs to come from society. Or maybe more tricky, we think it needs to come from our children, or our parents, or our sisters and brothers, friends, partners, or our dogs. Why do we love dogs so much? For more reason than one. We want to feel guilty. We choose to feel guilty. When we're conscious of it and we realize it's not the best thing to do, if we continue that, it's a choice. You prefer feeling guilty over not feeling guilty and standing out in a negative way. See what I mean? So feeling guilty is a way to compensate for feeling already guilty underneath that. We try to cover up feeling guilty with feeling guilty. It's one of the most important things to us, to our consciousness, to our present state of consciousness, is that others acknowledge us, that others see us, that others love us. Others, 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 others. We're so dependent upon the other. We're so deprived, usually, of our sense of inner love, of our sense of forgiveness, of our sense of belonging to all that is, that we desperately seek it outside of ourselves.